Welcome to the channel. If you're enjoying these videos, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more fascinating journeys through history, and leave a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. We love seeing our global community come together, whether you're tuning in from a quiet city at dawn or a countryside at midnight. Now, lay back, relax, and let's explore the hidden history of one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. Long before the sweeping conquests of Alexander the Great, and centuries before the rise of Rome, there flourished a mighty civilization in the heart of what is now Iran. This was the Persian Empire, a realm that stretched across 3 continents, uniting peoples, cultures, and knowledge in a way the ancient world had never seen. While much is known about its grandeur and imperial scale, there are lesser-known tales and details, subtle threads of history that are often overlooked. Tonight, we journey through these forgotten corridors of time. Let's begin with the world before Persia. The land we now call Iran was once home to several advanced and powerful civilizations, including the Elamites in the southwest, who thrived as early as 2700 BCE. The Elamites built cities, temples, and even practiced early forms of writing. They were a formidable presence in Mesopotamia, often at war or in alliance with the Sumerians and Babylonians. Fast forward to around 1000 BCE, a group of Indo-European nomadic peoples migrated into the Iranian plateau. Among these were the Medes and the Persians. The Medes settled in the northwest and eventually established a kingdom. The Persians, meanwhile, settled further south in a region called Pars or Perses, hence the name Persia. Initially, the Persians were vassals under the Medes, but their fate would soon change under the leadership of a remarkable figure, Cyrus the Second, better known as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great is not just a name from dusty history books. His impact is felt even today. Born around 600 BCE, he united the Persian tribes and led a revolt against the Median king Astyages, his own grandfather, around 550 BCE. In a bold and tactically brilliant campaign, Cyrus overthrew the Medes and took control of their empire, effectively founding what would become the Achaemenid Empire, the first true Persian empire. Cyrus's greatness wasn't simply a military conquest. He was a visionary ruler known for his tolerance and administrative genius. After conquering Babylon in 539 BCE, he freed the Jewish people held in captivity and allowed them to return to their homeland. A gesture so significant, it is recorded in both the Hebrew Bible and on the Cyrus cylinder, an ancient clay document considered by some as the first charter of human rights. Cyrus's empire rapidly expanded. It stretched from the Aegean Sea in the west to the Indus River in the east, encompassing a diverse mosaic of peoples, Greeks, Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Jews, and countless others. He respected their cultures, languages, and religions, a policy that earned loyalty and peace in many corners of the empire. Upon his death in 530 BCE, during a campaign in Central Asia, Cyrus was buried in a modest but enduring tomb in Pasargadae, the capital he had built. The tomb still stands today, a silent tribute to a king who shaped the ancient world. Following Cyrus was his son, Cambyses II, who continued the path of conquest by taking Egypt in 525 BCE. However, Cambyses' reign was troubled. He reportedly became erratic and harsh, with ancient sources describing episodes of cruelty, although it's worth remembering these accounts were often written by enemies. While Cambyses was away in Egypt, a man claiming to be his brother seized the throne. Cambyses, upon hearing this, began a return journey to Persia, but died mysteriously en route. The man who had claimed the throne was killed by a group of nobles, and from this upheaval emerged one of Persia's most influential rulers, Darius I, known as Darius the Great. Darius came to power under unclear circumstances, likely aided by political maneuvering and military support. He was not of direct royal lineage, but was related to Cyrus's family through marriage. Once on the throne, Darius proved to be an exceptional ruler. He reorganized the empire into provinces, or satrapies, each governed by a satrap who answered to the king. He established a system of roads, the most famous being the Royal Road, stretching over 1,600 miles, to facilitate communication and trade. He introduced standardized coinage, which helped unify the economy of a vast and diverse empire. But Darius's legacy isn't just administrative. He also left behind some of the grandest architectural achievements of ancient Iran, including the beginnings of the ceremonial capital Persepolis, a city of splendid palaces, grand halls, and intricate reliefs. Darius was also responsible for compiling one of the most detailed records of his reign, the Behistun inscription, carved into a cliffside and written in 3 languages. This trilingual inscription became instrumental in the decipherment of cuneiform script in the 19th century, much like the Rosetta Stone did for Egyptian hieroglyphs. Yet for all his brilliance, Darius also had military ambitions that did not always succeed. His attempts to subdue the Greeks in mainland Europe were met with resistance. His campaign ended in failure at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, a momentous event in Greek and Persian history that signaled the beginning of the Greco-Persian Wars. This moment in history marks the rise of tension between East and West, a narrative often simplified in popular storytelling, but in truth, the exchanges between Persia and Greece were far more nuanced, involving diplomacy, trade, intermarriage, and mutual influence. The Persian Empire at its height was not just about conquest, it was about connectivity. It linked the East and the West through a network of roads, trade routes, and shared knowledge. It helped spread ideas, technologies, and artistic styles across continents. Persian engineers developed qanats, underground aqueducts that brought water to arid lands, a technique still in use today. Its religion, Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zoroaster, introduced concepts that would influence future Abrahamic faiths: monotheism, heaven and hell, the idea of a final judgment, and a cosmic struggle between good and evil. Though not enforced as a state religion, Zoroastrianism deeply shaped Persian identity and governance, emphasizing truth, order, and righteousness. The Persian Empire was a paradox: mighty yet merciful, expansive yet respectful of diversity, deeply traditional yet open to innovation. These contrasts are what make its history so fascinating and so often hidden in the shadow of its better-known rivals. As Darius the Great aged, the reins of his vast empire began to shift toward his chosen successor, Xerxes I, a name that would soon echo through history due to one of the most legendary confrontations between East and West. Xerxes, inheriting the throne in 486 BCE, was not only tasked with maintaining the vast territories acquired by his father and grandfather, but also with addressing unfinished business, most notably the subjugation of the Greek city-states that had defied Persian authority. To Xerxes, the campaigns in Greece were not merely military objectives. They were acts of vengeance and prestige. His father's loss at Marathon lingered as a national wound, and restoring Persian dominance in the Aegean was a matter of imperial pride. Xerxes' campaign against Greece began with enormous preparation. Herodotus, the famed Greek historian, described vast mustering of troops and ships, an army so large it drank rivers dry. Though his numbers are likely exaggerated, the sheer scale of logistics required speaks volumes about Persian capabilities. Bridges were built across the Hellespont, using ships lashed together. Roads were improved. Supply lines were established. This was not a mere raid. It was a continental operation. Yet, despite these efforts, Persian forces met unexpected resistance. The now mythologized stand of 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, though tactically insignificant, became a powerful symbol of defiance. Eventually, Xerxes captured and burned Athens, but the tide turned dramatically at the naval battle of Salamis, where the Greek fleet dealt a crushing blow. Without naval supremacy, Persian forces were forced into retreat. Though the Persian Empire remained intact, the Greco-Persian Wars revealed its limits. It could be resisted, and its aura of invincibility had dimmed. But while the Greeks were celebrating their resilience, the Persian Empire itself remained a marvel of administration and infrastructure. The empire's internal workings are often overshadowed by tales of war, yet its governance was revolutionary for its time. Under both Darius and Xerxes, Persia operated not as a monolithic state, but as a vast, pluralistic web of satrapies, each with its own local customs, language, and leaders, so long as taxes were paid and loyalty maintained. This decentralized model was enforced not by brute force alone, but by a delicate balance of respect, surveillance, and integration. The king's eye, imperial inspectors, traveled throughout the empire, reporting directly to the king and ensuring no region grew too autonomous. Yet even as they kept order, Persian rulers often promoted local elites, married into regional nobility, and sponsored temples and festivals of diverse cultures. This level of cultural inclusivity was rare in the ancient world and allowed the empire to endure longer than many of its contemporaries. It is also during this period that the splendor of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, reached its peak. Constructed over several generations, Persepolis was not a traditional seat of government, but a monumental statement of imperial ideology. Towering columns, exquisite bas-reliefs, and vast audience halls created a setting where the great king received tribute from the corners of his empire. These reliefs are more than art. They are political propaganda carved in stone. Delegates from various lands are depicted in traditional dress, bringing gifts, not as subjects in chains, but as partners in a grand civilizational project. This visual narrative subtly reinforced the image of the Persian king as a benevolent world ruler, harmonizing a diversity of peoples. It was an architectural embodiment of order, or Asha, a central concept in Zoroastrianism that represented truth, justice, and the cosmic balance against chaos. However, beneath this grandeur, internal strains began to show. Royal succession was often murky and contentious. The immense wealth of the empire led to court intrigues, and as the years passed, the centralized authority of the king became more ceremonial than absolute. Satraps grew more autonomous, their loyalty wavering as local power bases strengthened. While outwardly the empire remained majestic, its core was slowly eroding from within. After Xerxes, his successors, Artaxerxes I, Darius II, and Artaxerxes II struggled with palace coups, civil wars, and revolts in Egypt and Babylon. Though they managed to maintain the integrity of the empire, their reigns were increasingly reactive rather than visionary. The creative and administrative vitality that had defined the early Achaemenids began to wane, and the empire slipped into a more defensive posture. Meanwhile, to the west, the Greek world was evolving. The Peloponnesian Wars had left many city-states weakened, and into this power vacuum rose a kingdom once considered peripheral, Macedon. Under King Philip II and later his son, Alexander the Great, Macedon transformed from a backwater monarchy into a disciplined military powerhouse. When Alexander inherited the throne in 336 BCE, he inherited not just a kingdom, but a vision, one that would bring him into direct conflict with the Persian Empire. The Persian court, perhaps accustomed to previous skirmishes with Greek city-states, underestimated the threat. But Alexander moved swiftly and decisively. In 334 BCE, he crossed the Hellespont and began a campaign that would dismantle centuries of Persian dominance in less than a decade. The key moment came at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Here, Alexander, though vastly outnumbered, used superior tactics and mobility to defeat Darius III, the last king of the Achaemenid line. Darius fled the battlefield, a symbolic unraveling of the empire's once proud image. Alexander then marched through the heartlands of Persia, Susa, Persepolis, and eventually into Central Asia, declaring himself the rightful heir of Cyrus and Darius. In a dramatic gesture, he adopted Persian dress, customs, and even married Persian nobles, blending Hellenistic and Iranian traditions. Yet his conquest was not without violence. The burning of Persepolis, whether an accident, a drunken act of revenge, or a calculated political move, marked a symbolic end to the Persian Golden Age. Though Alexander's empire would splinter after his death, the Persian cultural legacy endured. The Seleucids, who succeeded him in Iran, retained much of the administrative framework laid by the Achaemenids. Persian language, art, and governance continued to influence Central Asia and the Near East for centuries. In many ways, the empire was never truly extinguished. It merely evolved. Later empires, including the Parthians and Sasanians, would draw directly from Achaemenid models, framing themselves as continuations of the Persian legacy, guardians of Zoroastrian traditions, and heirs to the throne of kingship established by Cyrus the Great. And so, the hidden history of Persia is not just a tale of kings and battles. It is a story of administrative brilliance, cultural pluralism, spiritual philosophy, and architectural majesty. It is a reminder that empires are not built solely on force, but on ideas. Ideas of unity amidst diversity, of governance that respects local identity while nurturing a shared civilizational purpose. Persia's story is not a footnote in Western history. It is one of the central chapters in the history of human civilization. In the wake of Alexander's dramatic conquest and sudden death in 323 BCE, the territories of the once great Achaemenid Empire were left in disarray, a shattered mosaic of regions ruled by his generals, known collectively as the Diadochi. Among them, Seleucus Nicator emerged as a dominant figure in the eastern portions of the former Persian lands. From his seat of power, he founded the Seleucid Empire, a Hellenistic state that attempted to fuse Greek culture with the deeply rooted traditions of Iran. The Seleucids brought new cities, Greek-style administration, and language to regions that had once spoken Old Persian and followed Zoroastrian practices. But this attempt at Hellenization was only partially successful. Beneath the veneer of Greek governance, Persian identity persisted, quiet, adaptive, and enduring. The Seleucid rulers, though powerful in their early days, gradually lost their grip on the Iranian plateau. The highlands of Iran had always been difficult to control, and from these mountainous regions rose a new power, the Parthians, a semi-nomadic group of Iranian origin from the northeast. Originally part of the Seleucid realm, the Parthians, under their leader Arsaces Biswas, rebelled in the mid-3rd century BCE and established an independent kingdom. Over time, the Arsacid dynasty expanded its territory and declared itself the rightful successor to the Achaemenids. They adopted many Persian customs, embraced the title of King of Kings, and revived ancient Iranian symbols to legitimize their rule. The Parthian Empire, which endured for nearly 5 centuries, remains one of the least understood but most significant phases of Persian history. Their political system was a hybrid of nomadic traditions and settled bureaucracy. Rather than maintaining a centralized structure like the Achaemenids, the Parthians allowed local rulers or vassal kings a high degree of autonomy, provided they offered military support and loyalty. This federated model enabled the empire to govern a vast and diverse territory that stretched from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. Their capital at Ctesiphon, located near modern-day Baghdad, became one of the most important cultural and commercial hubs of the ancient world. Parthia's most enduring legacy, however, may lie in its military and diplomatic engagements with the Roman Empire. As Rome expanded eastward, it encountered in Parthia a rival too powerful to ignore and too foreign to fully comprehend. The two empires clashed repeatedly, most famously at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, where a Roman army under Crassus was utterly defeated by Parthian cavalry, a humiliating loss that haunted Roman memory for generations. The Parthians employed horse archers and heavily armored cataphracts, cavalry units capable of withstanding frontal assault and executing swift retreats. Their warfare was mobile, flexible, and devastating, reflecting the empire's roots in the steppes of Central Asia. But the Parthian story is not just one of military resistance. They were master diplomats and cultural synthesizers. Greek art, Persian religious motifs, and Central Asian design merged in Parthian sculpture, coins, and architecture. Temples featured both Hellenistic columns and Zoroastrian iconography. Their coinage bore inscriptions in Greek and Aramaic, a sign of their linguistic and cultural pluralism. And while Greek remained a lingua franca, Middle Persian languages began to reassert themselves, signaling a cultural reawakening that would culminate in the next great Persian dynasty, the Sasanians. In 224 CE, Ardashir I, a Persian noble from the province of Fars, rose in rebellion against the last Parthian king. Claiming descent from the ancient Achaemenids and presenting himself as the true restorer of Persian glory, Ardashir defeated the Parthian forces and established the Sasanian Empire, a centralized and ideologically coherent state that would endure for over 4 centuries. Unlike the Parthians, the Sasanians placed strong emphasis on a unified identity rooted in Zoroastrianism, Persian language, and centralized administration. Their vision was one of cultural revival and imperial grandeur, a deliberate echo of Cyrus, Darius, and the golden age of Persepolis. The Sasanians elevated Zoroastrianism to the status of state religion, codifying its rituals, scriptures, and priesthood in ways that had not existed before. Fire temples were built throughout the empire, and the sacred fire became a visible and potent symbol of divine order. The Avesta, the holy book of Zoroastrianism, was compiled and expanded, and the Magi, or priestly class, wielded significant influence. This religious centralization helped create a cohesive imperial ideology, but also led to tensions with minority faiths, including Christians, Jews, and later Manichaeans. The empire's official promotion of a single faith, though unifying, also marked a turn toward religious orthodoxy and, at times, persecution. Administratively, the Sasanian state was a sophisticated machine. Provinces were divided into smaller districts, taxes were regulated, and infrastructure was restored and expanded. Roads, bridges, canals, and cities flourished. The economy thrived on trade along the Silk Road, with Persian merchants acting as intermediaries between Rome, China, and India. Luxurious Persian silks, ceramics, and metalwork reached markets across Eurasia. Ctesiphon, once the seat of the Parthians, was transformed into a dazzling metropolis that rivaled Constantinople in wealth and population. The Sasanian kings styled themselves as Shahanshah, King of Kings, but they were also patrons of learning. Philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and literature were supported and translated from Indian, Greek, and Syriac sources. The Great Academy of Gundishapur became a center of scholarship where knowledge from across the known world was gathered and studied. This intellectual heritage would later have a profound influence on the Islamic Golden Age, as much of the Sasanian scholarly tradition was absorbed and built upon by Arab and Persian thinkers in the centuries to follow. Yet the Sasanian Empire was not without its challenges. It was constantly engaged in a delicate balance of power with the Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of Rome. A long series of wars, treaties, and shifting alliances marked the Sasanian-Byzantine relationship. Sometimes they exchanged embassies and gifts. At other times, they laid waste to each other's territories. The height of Sasanian power came under Khosrow I, who ruled from 531 to 579 CE. A reformer, strategist, and patron of the arts, Khosrow brought stability, promoted justice, and fostered economic growth. His reign is often considered a golden age within the Sasanian era. However, less than a century later, the empire would face its greatest threat, not from the Byzantines, but from a rising power in the Arabian Peninsula. The emergence of Islam in the 7th century and the rapid unification of Arab tribes under the banner of a new monotheism would set the stage for a seismic transformation in Persian history. The death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE coincided with internal instability within the Sasanian realm. Civil war, court intrigues, and a weakening of central authority left the empire vulnerable, just as the Islamic Caliphate launched its first campaigns into Persian lands. The battles that followed, most notably the Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 CE and the Battle of Nahavand in 642 CE, marked the final unraveling of Sasanian power. Yazdegerd III, the last Sasanian monarch, fled eastward, seeking refuge and allies, but he would eventually be assassinated in Central Asia. With his death, the last flame of the ancient Persian empires was extinguished. But Persia itself did not disappear. It transformed, adapted, and re-emerged. Though the fall of the Sasanian Empire marked the end of imperial Zoroastrian Persia, it was not the end of Persian culture, language, or influence. In fact, the centuries following the Islamic conquest of Persia represent one of the most remarkable cultural transformations in human history. Not one of annihilation, but of synthesis and resilience. As Arab-Muslim rule spread across the former Sasanian territories, the Persian people gradually embraced Islam, particularly the Shia tradition, which would come to define much of Iranian identity. However, this religious transition did not erase Persian heritage. Instead, Persian culture subtly reshaped the emerging Islamic civilization from within. The Persian language, which had receded into obscurity during the late Sasanian period, was reborn in a new form. New Persian, written in the Arabic script, but infused with a vocabulary and worldview deeply rooted in Iran's past. This new literary language would become the medium for some of the most exquisite poetry, philosophy, and historical writing in the Islamic world. Figures like Ferdowsi, the 10th century poet of the Shahnameh, played a critical role in preserving and reviving Persian cultural memory. His epic, composed over decades, tells the mythical and historical tales of pre-Islamic Iran, from the creation of the world to the fall of the Sasanian dynasty. In thousands of rhyming couplets, he immortalized heroes, kings, and battles, infusing them with timeless moral lessons and national pride. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh was not merely literature, it was an act of cultural preservation. At a time when Arabic was the language of religion, science, and empire, Ferdowsi demonstrated that Persian could still carry the weight of epic storytelling, historical consciousness, and national identity. His work became a cornerstone of Iranian culture and inspired generations of writers, artists, and rulers to embrace their heritage, even within an Islamic framework. The fact that the Persian language survived, evolved, and even flourished in a post-Sasanian world is a testament to the resilience of Persian identity. During the Islamic Golden Age, many of the most celebrated scientists, philosophers, and scholars hailed from Persian lands. Thinkers such as Avicenna, Ibn Sina, in medicine and philosophy, Al-Farabi, Omar Khayyam, and Al-Ghazali shaped Islamic and global intellectual traditions in profound ways. These polymaths operated in a world that blended Greek rationalism, Islamic theology, and Persian cosmology. Their contributions in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, ethics, and metaphysics were not isolated achievements, but part of a larger Persian resurgence under Islamic rule. Meanwhile, Persian bureaucratic traditions were also adopted by the early Islamic caliphates. The Umayyads, and especially the Abbasids, relied heavily on Persian advisors, scribes, and administrators to manage the vast territories of the Islamic Empire. The Abbasid court in Baghdad mirrored many Sasanian customs, from ceremonial pageantry to political theory. Indeed, many aspects of what we now consider classical Islamic civilization, its architecture, court culture, literature, and political organization, were deeply shaped by Persian precedents. Even Persian cities like Nishapur, Rai, Herat, and Isfahan re-emerged as cultural and economic centers under new dynasties. In time, Iranian Muslim dynasties such as the Tahirids, Samanids, and Buyids would reassert Iranian political and cultural autonomy. The Samanids in particular championed Persian over Arabic in literature and supported poets like Rudaki and Dakichi, precursors to the golden age of Persian poetry. Their courts became bastions of Persian revivalism, where scholars proudly explored Iran's pre-Islamic past while embracing Islamic values. And so, even as the imperial structures of old Persia had collapsed, its soul endured through language, through art, through memory. The hidden history of Persia reveals not just a series of dynasties or battles, but a long arc of cultural survival, reinvention, and influence. Persia did not fade into history after the Arab conquests. It became part of something larger, shaping the future of the Islamic world, the East, and even the West in subtle but powerful ways. As the Islamic world matured and fractured into competing caliphates and dynasties, Persia once again became the crucible for political and cultural renewal. The medieval period in Iran was not a time of cultural dormancy, but one of astonishing creativity, resilience, and resurgence. Emerging from the shadows of the Arab-led caliphates, native Iranian dynasties reasserted their influence and created a uniquely Persian Islamic civilization, blending the spiritual dynamism of Islam with the artistic, literary, and political legacies of their ancient forebears. Among the most influential of these Iranian dynasties were the Samanids, who ruled over northeastern Iran and Central Asia during the 9th and 10th centuries. Though loyal to the Abbasid Caliph in name, the Samanids were de facto independent. More importantly, they were passionate patrons of Persian literature and culture. They established Bukhara and Samarkand as centers of learning, art, and poetry. Under their rule, New Persian, using the Arabic script, became a language of refined expression, no longer confined to the spoken word, but fully legitimized as a medium of high literature. It was in this fertile environment that the seeds of the Persian literary renaissance were sown. Poets such as Rudaki, often considered the father of Persian poetry, flourished at the Samanid court. Rudaki's verses sang of love, nature, and philosophical reflection, written in melodious Persian that set the standard for generations to follow. But it was Ferdowsi, working a century later, who delivered the grand culmination of Persian epic tradition. His Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, was a sweeping narrative that preserved Iran's pre-Islamic legends, heroes, and monarchs. It was more than literature. It was a declaration that Persian identity had not been erased by conquest or time. In every line, Ferdowsi reaffirmed that the spirit of Persia endured even within the boundaries of an Islamic empire. Meanwhile, other dynasties like the Buyids and Ziyarids wielded real power across western Iran and Iraq. The Buyids, in particular, were Shia Muslims who controlled Baghdad and acted as the true power behind the Abbasid caliphs. They promoted Persian culture, patronized scholars, and built libraries and observatories. In this period, Persian architecture began to evolve again. Brick domes, soaring arches, and intricate tilework returned to prominence. Echoes of Achaemenid and Sasanian designs reimagined through Islamic aesthetics. Mosques and madrasas became canvases for Persian artisans, adorned with geometric precision, flowing calligraphy, and vibrant color. As these Persian-led dynasties rose and fell, another force was gaining strength on the steppes of Central Asia. The Seljuk Turks, originally nomadic warriors from the east, converted to Islam and swept into Persia in the 11th century. Though foreign in origin, the Seljuks quickly embraced Persian culture. They adopted Persian as the language of administration and high culture, and they surrounded themselves with Iranian scholars, poets, and viziers. Their empire stretched from Anatolia to Central Asia, but their cultural heart was undeniably Persian. One of the most enduring legacies of the Seljuks was their support for Nizam al-Mulk, a brilliant Persian vizier who wrote the Siyasat-Nama, a treatise on governance steeped in Persian political thought. Nizam al-Mulk also established a network of madrasas, or Islamic colleges, known as Nizamiyas, which became centers of intellectual development. These institutions helped spread Persian philosophy, theology, and administrative practices throughout the Islamic world. Under the Seljuks, Persian art and architecture flourished. The era saw the rise of monumental buildings like the Great Mosque of Isfahan, a structure whose elegance and harmony would set the standard for Persian Islamic architecture for centuries. Philosophically, this era witnessed a flourishing of thought that would resonate far beyond Iran's borders. Thinkers such as Avicenna, Ibn Sina, a polymath born in the Char region of Bukhara, wrote works that synthesized Greek philosophy with Islamic theology and Persian metaphysics. His canon of medicine became a standard medical text in both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. In the realm of poetry, Omar Khayyam, known for his rubaiyat, reflected on the nature of time, fate, and the human condition in verses that remain hauntingly beautiful. His quatrains, filled with existential wonder and sensual delight, captured the soul of Persian introspection. By the 12th century, Persian culture had become so intertwined with Islam that to speak of Islamic civilization without acknowledging Persian contributions would be a profound omission. The Persianate world had extended into the Indian subcontinent, Central Asia, and even parts of the Levant. Persian became the language of diplomacy, science, and poetry across this vast realm, influencing not just Muslims, but also Hindus, Buddhists, and Christians. It was a civilization defined not by rigid boundaries, but by fluidity, exchange, and creativity. Yet, just as Persian civilization seemed to be reaching a new zenith, the world was shaken by a cataclysm unlike any before: the Mongol invasions. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan and his successors unleashed a wave of conquest that swept across Eurasia with unprecedented speed and ferocity. Cities were razed, populations decimated, and ancient institutions destroyed. Persia, with its wealth and strategic location, suffered terribly. The Mongols destroyed libraries, massacred scholars, and reduced cities like Nishapur and Ray to ashes. But even in this moment of chaos, Persia adapted. The Mongols, particularly under Hulagu Khan and later his descendant Ghazan Khan, began to settle, convert to Islam, and adopt Persian administration and culture. The Ilkhanate, the Mongol dynasty ruling over Persia, became a major center of learning and art. Persian historians like Rashid al-Din penned massive compendiums of world history, merging Mongol and Persian narratives. Art flourished once again, with miniature painting, manuscript illumination, and architectural design reaching new heights. Thus, even the Mongol storm could not extinguish the Persian flame. Instead, it marked yet another transformation, a testament to the deep-rooted resilience and adaptability of Persian civilization. Through centuries of upheaval, foreign rule, and cultural interchange, Persia did not vanish. It evolved, absorbed, and re-emerged, each time more nuanced, more layered, and more profound. As the Ilkhanate matured and gradually Persianized, it sowed the seeds for a cultural revival that would reach its full bloom in the centuries to follow. The 14th and 15th centuries in Iran were a time of profound artistic refinement, philosophical depth, and architectural innovation, despite the backdrop of political fragmentation. Following the decline of Mongol rule, Persia splintered into smaller kingdoms and competing principalities, yet Persian culture flourished in these very conditions. Freed from the constraints of a single imperial authority, regional courts in cities like Shiraz, Herat, and Tabriz became hotbeds of patronage and creativity. One of the brightest stars in this era was the city of Herat, under the rule of the Timurids, a dynasty founded by Tamerlane, Timur, a formidable conqueror with ambitions as vast as Genghis Khan's, yet with a passion for Persian culture. Though of Turkic-Mongol origin, Timur embraced the Persian language and traditions. He plundered cities across Asia, but with the wealth he accumulated, he built magnificent monuments and gathered the finest artisans, scholars, and architects of his age. His successors, particularly Shah Rukh and Ulugh Beg, transformed Herat into the cultural and intellectual capital of the Islamic world. The Timurid era witnessed the pinnacle of Persian miniature painting, an art form that combined intricate detail with vivid storytelling. Illustrated manuscripts from this period, particularly editions of the Shahnameh and Kamseh of Nizami, stand among the greatest artistic achievements of Islamic civilization. Persian calligraphy, already esteemed, evolved into a spiritual and aesthetic discipline, with master scribes producing works of astonishing elegance. Architecture too reached new heights. The Blue Mosque of Tabriz, the Madrasa, complexes of Samarkand, and the domed mausoleums of Herat reflected a synthesis of Mongol boldness and Persian refinement, expressed in symmetrical designs, glazed tiles, and harmonious proportions. It was also during this time that Sufi mysticism deeply permeated Persian society. Sufism had long been present in Iran, but the post-Mongol period saw its blossoming into a major spiritual and cultural force. Poets like Rumi, Attar, and Hafez wove the themes of divine love, longing, and transcendence into verses that spoke not just to the elite, but to the soul of the people. Their poetry became both a religious experience and a literary treasure. Rumi's Masnavi is often called the Quran in Persian, while Hafez's Divan remains a sacred text in Iranian homes, consulted for guidance in moments of uncertainty or celebration. Through Sufi brotherhoods and poetry gatherings, Persian identity was reshaped not through politics, but through spirit and imagination. Persian Islam became imbued with a depth of introspection and beauty rarely matched elsewhere. This spiritual flowering also influenced Persian ethical and philosophical thought. Commentaries on Avicenna, translations of Greek works, and original treatises on metaphysics, logic, and cosmology proliferated. The madrasa remained not just a religious institution, but a center for intellectual exploration, where philosophy, jurisprudence, and astronomy were debated with fervor. But this era of artistic brilliance and spiritual contemplation also laid the groundwork for the next political transformation, one that would definitively restore Iran's unity and sovereignty under a distinctly Persian and Islamic banner. By the early 16th century, a charismatic young leader named Ismail Vir emerged from the mountainous region of Ardabil. Claiming descent from both Sufi saints and ancient kings. Ismail united various Turkic tribes under the banner of Shia Islam, proclaiming himself the Shah of Iran in 1501 and founding the Safavid dynasty. This marked a pivotal moment. For the first time in nearly 900 years, a native Persian dynasty ruled a unified Iran with a clearly defined religious identity. The Safavid Empire would reshape Iran's religious, political, and cultural landscape. Under Ismail and his successors, Twelver Shi'ism was declared the state religion, a radical departure in a Sunni-dominated Islamic world. This bold declaration, enforced by both persuasion and coercion, created a unique Shia Iranian identity that persists to this day. But beyond religion, the Safavids revitalized Persian art, architecture, and political institutions, drawing on ancient traditions while forging a modern national consciousness. And so, from the ashes of Mongol conquest and the turbulence of fractured rule, Persia emerged once more, a phoenix reborn, not just in splendor, but in soul. The threads of its ancient empires, the words of its poets, the insights of its scholars, and the melodies of its mystics had not been lost. They had merely waited, like seeds in the soil of history, for the right moment to bloom again. The rise of the Safavid dynasty in the early 16th century marked not just the re-emergence of a sovereign and unified Persia, but also the crystallization of a distinct Iranian identity defined by geography, culture, and most decisively, faith. When Shah Ismail Bikhay declared Shia Islam as the state religion in 1501, he was not simply making a theological choice. He was laying the foundation for a nation that would be spiritually and politically distinct from its powerful Sunni neighbors, the Ottoman Empire to the west and the Uzbeks to the northeast. This move transformed Iran from a loosely connected collection of provinces into a coherent ideological and cultural entity. Shah Ismail, only a teenager when he took the throne, fused his charismatic Sufi background with a messianic image, portraying himself as both the rightful king and a divine leader. His poetry, written in Azerbaijani Turkic, often invoked spiritual and mystical themes, blending personal devotion with imperial vision. He quickly consolidated his power, defeating rival Turkic and Persian factions, and moved to assert control over the Iranian plateau. But his decision to enforce Shi'ism across his territories was revolutionary and at times brutally enforced. Sunni clerics were expelled or executed, and Shia theology was institutionalized through state-sponsored education and clerical appointments. This transformation was not instant nor peaceful, but over the next century, it fundamentally altered the religious landscape of Iran. Ismail's successors, especially Shah Abbas I, would build upon this legacy and elevate the Safavid Empire to its zenith. Reigning from 1588 to 1629, Shah Abbas was both a ruthless strategist and an enlightened patron of the arts. Recognizing the threats from the Ottomans and Uzbeks, he restructured the military, reducing the power of tribal leaders and establishing a standing army loyal to the crown. He reformed the bureaucracy, improved taxation, and created an extensive network of roads and caravanserais that revitalized trade across the empire. The silk industry boomed, and Persian textiles became prized commodities across Europe and Asia. Perhaps Shah Abbas's most visible legacy is the transformation of Isfahan into one of the most magnificent cities of the early modern world. Under his direction, Isfahan was redesigned as the empire's capital, a city of domes, minarets, bridges, and gardens. The centerpiece was the Naqsh-e-Jahan Square, or Image of the World, a vast public space flanked by the Shah Mosque, the Sheikh Lotfola Mosque, and the Ali Kapu Palace. Each structure was a masterpiece of Persian architecture, adorned with intricate tile work, geometric patterns, and calligraphy that mirrored the spiritual harmony of the universe. Isfahan, as the Safavids declared, was half the world, a cultural jewel that radiated the sophistication of Persian civilization. Yet, it was not just architecture that flourished. The Safavid period saw a renaissance in Persian painting, calligraphy, metalwork, and ceramics. The Isfahan School of Art produced breathtaking miniature paintings that depicted courtly life, epic tales, and mystical allegories. Poets and philosophers continued to explore the themes of divine love, existential yearning, and human ethics. Persian literature remained vibrant, with works of lyrical poetry, historical chronicles, and theological debate circulating widely across the empire and beyond. At the heart of this cultural flowering was a unique intertwining of religion and national identity. The Safavid state developed a structured Shia clerical establishment, endowing religious institutions, sponsoring theological scholarship, and integrating clerics into the fabric of governance. This was a marked departure from earlier empires, where religious authority often remained independent or peripheral to state power. Under the Safavids, the symbiosis between crown and cleric solidified Shi'ism not just as a personal faith, but as the ideological cornerstone of the Persian state. However, as with many great empires, the later Safavid period was marked by decline. Successors to Shah Abbas lacked his vigor and vision. Court intrigues, economic stagnation, and military complacency weakened the state. By the early 18th century, the empire faced rising dissent from both within and beyond. Tribal rebellions erupted, and in 1722, Afghan forces under Mahmud Hotak laid siege to Isfahan and captured the city. The Safavid court collapsed, and the dynasty fell into chaos. The once proud capital, Isfahan, was left scarred by violence and abandonment, its glorious domes silent under the weight of despair. Yet, even in this moment of dissolution, Persia did not vanish into historical oblivion. The memory of Safavid grandeur, the entrenchment of Shi'ism, and the aesthetic achievements of Isfahan continued to shape the Iranian consciousness. A series of short-lived regimes followed: the Afsharids under Nader Shah, the Zands under Karim Khan, and finally the Qajar dynasty, which would attempt to rebuild the Persian state in a rapidly changing world. The Safavid period left behind more than monuments. It gave Iran its religious identity, a revived sense of cultural self, and a blueprint for nationhood that would resonate through the centuries. The dual legacy of spiritual depth and worldly splendor, embodied in the Safavid ethos, became part of Iran's enduring narrative, binding its ancient imperial past to its Islamic and modern futures. With the fall of the Safavids in the early 18th century, Iran entered a chaotic and fractured period, marked by the rapid rise and fall of military strongmen, tribal uprisings, and foreign incursions. The once cohesive Safavid order unraveled, and for a time, the Iranian plateau splintered into competing spheres of influence. Yet even amid this instability, the Persian soul endured, seeking form in new expressions of leadership and identity. The most prominent figure to emerge from this turbulence was Nader Shah Afshar, a brilliant and ruthless military commander who seized control of Iran in 1736. Of Turkoman origin and hailing from the province of Khorasan, Nader Shah possessed an uncanny talent for strategy, leading Iran through a series of stunning military campaigns that would restore its territorial integrity and expand its influence. He drove out the Afghans, repelled Ottoman and Russian advances, and even marched into Delhi in 1739, where he looted the riches of the Mughal court, including the famed Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. At his peak, Nader ruled over a vast empire stretching from the Caucasus to the Indus River. Yet, his reign was as volatile as it was grand. Aware of the deep sectarian rift between Iran's Shia majority and its Sunni neighbors, Nader attempted to introduce a form of Islam that would bridge this divide, proposing a more neutral, ecumenical interpretation. His efforts, though diplomatically motivated, alienated both clerical establishments. Over time, Nader became increasingly paranoid and autocratic, executing rivals and relatives alike. In 1747, he was assassinated by his own officers, and his empire quickly disintegrated into regional warlordism. Following Nader's death, Iran fell into a fragmented state. The Zand dynasty, led by the compassionate and admired Karim Khan Zand, briefly unified much of the country and re-established stability. Unlike many of his predecessors, Karim Khan eschewed grandiose titles and ruled from Shiraz as a benevolent governor rather than an imperial monarch. His court became a haven for artists and scholars, and his capital flourished with gardens, bazaars, and architectural elegance. Karim Khan's humility and humane governance earned him lasting affection, but after his death, infighting among his successors led to the collapse of Zand authority. Into this vacuum stepped the Qajar dynasty, which would dominate Iranian politics from the late 18th century into the early 20th century. The Qajars, originally a Turkic tribe from the Caspian region, established Tehran as their capital and set about consolidating control over a weakened and impoverished Iran. Their rule coincided with a rapidly changing world, one shaped by the expanding empires of Britain and Russia, who viewed Iran as a strategic buffer zone in their geopolitical rivalries. The Qajar era was defined by this entanglement with foreign powers, often to Iran's detriment. Through a series of unequal treaties and territorial losses, most notably in the Caucasus, Iran ceded large swaths of land to Russia. British influence grew in the south, particularly in the Persian Gulf and in the emerging oil industry. Internally, the Qajar monarchy was plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and extravagant court life, even as the majority of the population lived in poverty. Yet this period also sparked the stirrings of modern nationalism and reform. Intellectuals, merchants, clerics, and military officers began to question the legitimacy of absolute monarchy and foreign domination. Western ideas of constitutional government, education, and civil rights began to penetrate Persian society, often filtered through Islamic and traditional lenses. By the late 19th century, these pressures culminated in the Persian Constitutional Revolution of 1905 to 1911, a landmark event in Iranian history. Driven by a coalition of ulema, bazaar merchants, and secular reformers, the revolution sought to limit the power of the monarchy and establish a national parliament, or majlis. It succeeded, briefly, in drafting a constitution and initiating parliamentary life. Though the movement was repeatedly undermined by royalist forces and foreign intervention, it marked the beginning of Iran's modern political journey. For the first time, the Persian people asserted their collective voice in governance, demanding accountability, transparency, and representation. During this same time, Iran's cultural scene underwent a transformation. Printing presses proliferated, newspapers flourished, and intellectual salons debated everything from religion to economics. A new Persian prose style emerged, clear, direct, and infused with political purpose. Women, who had long been excluded from public discourse, began to organize, write, and advocate for education and rights. The seeds of feminism, nationalism, and anti-imperialism were being sown. Yet the Qajar monarchy, weakened and directionless, could not manage the complex currents of the early 20th century. In 1921, a military officer named Reza Khan, with British backing, staged a coup that would soon end Qajar rule. In 1925, he declared himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, inaugurating the Pahlavi dynasty and launching a program of radical modernization. Reza Shah sought to rebuild Iran as a strong, centralized, secular nation-state. He pursued infrastructure projects, built roads and railways, secularized education, and introduced legal reforms modeled after European systems. He also worked to diminish the power of the clergy and tribal leaders, promoting a uniform Persian identity over ethnic and sectarian diversity. While these efforts brought undeniable modernization, they were often enforced through authoritarian means. Traditional dress was banned, public religious expression curtailed, and dissent suppressed. Still, many Iranians embraced the promise of a modern, sovereign Persia. The 1930s and 1940s were a time of both pride and discontent, of growing cities, rising literacy, and burgeoning nationalism, but also of repression, inequality, and anxiety about identity in a fast-changing world. And thus, once again, Persia, now Iran, stood at a crossroads, tethered to a glorious, complex past and hurtling toward an uncertain future. It was a country shaped by millennia of empire, faith, poetry, and conquest, and now by oil, geopolitics, and global ideologies. By the mid-20th century, Iran had become a nation poised on the edge of transformation. Under the rule of Reza Shah Pahlavi, the country was rapidly modernizing, industries were growing, infrastructure was expanding, and a sense of national identity rooted in Persian heritage was being aggressively promoted. Ancient symbols, such as the Achaemenid Cyrus the Great, were elevated as icons of secular nationalism. Reza Shah envisioned an Iran that drew its strength not from Islamic tradition, but from its pre-Islamic imperial glory. This reinvention, however, came at a cost. His authoritarian rule, suppression of political dissent, and efforts to marginalize religious institutions created a volatile atmosphere, even as the external world began to exert stronger influence over Iran's fate. World War II further complicated the nation's trajectory. Though officially neutral, Iran's strategic importance, particularly its oil reserves and geographic location as a bridge between the Soviet Union and the British Empire, drew the attention of the Allies. In 1941, British and Soviet forces jointly invaded Iran, forcing Reza Shah to abdicate in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. While the young Shah retained the throne, real power increasingly shifted toward parliamentary forces and foreign interests. The occupation, though temporary, exposed Iran to new political ideologies, economic systems, and social movements. For the Iranian people, it was a time of awakening and disillusionment. Amid this atmosphere, a powerful wave of nationalism surged. The most visible and influential figure of this movement was Mohammad Mossadegh, a charismatic and principled politician who championed Iranian sovereignty, constitutionalism, and economic independence. His most famous act came in 1951, when, as Prime Minister, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, wresting control of Iran's most valuable resource from British hands. This bold move sparked an international crisis, with Britain imposing a blockade and lobbying for American support to counter Mossadegh's growing influence. The United States, increasingly driven by Cold War anxieties, viewed Mossadegh's populism and independence with suspicion. In 1953, with covert backing from the CIA and British intelligence, a coup known as Operation Ajax toppled Mossadegh's government. The Shah was restored to full power, and Iran was placed firmly within the Western Bloc. Though the coup succeeded in short-term geopolitical terms, it left a lasting scar on the Iranian psyche. Many Iranians came to see the monarchy as a puppet of foreign powers, and resentment simmered beneath the surface. In the decades that followed, Mohammad Reza Shah embarked on an ambitious agenda known as the White Revolution, a series of social, economic, and cultural reforms designed to modernize and westernize Iranian society. Land reform, women's suffrage, education expansion, and industrialization were central components. But these policies, while progressive on paper, were often implemented without consultation or sensitivity to traditional structures. They alienated powerful landowners, displaced rural populations, and created vast urban slums. Moreover, the Shah's growing reliance on the secret police, Savak, to suppress opposition made political life in Iran increasingly repressive. Yet even as discontent grew, the government projected an image of success and prosperity. Lavish celebrations, such as the 2,500-year anniversary of the Persian monarchy, held in 1971 at Persepolis, were designed to showcase Iran's ancient roots and modern achievements. But beneath the surface, a complex web of dissatisfaction was forming. Secular intellectuals decried the regime's authoritarianism and corruption. Clerics criticized its westernization and neglect of Islamic values. Workers and students protested economic disparity and social injustice. These diverse grievances would eventually converge in the revolutionary fervor of the late 1970s. Led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a Shia cleric exiled for his opposition to the Shah's regime, the Islamic movement began to galvanize mass support across social classes. What began as scattered protests soon became a national uprising. In 1979, the Pahlavi dynasty collapsed and the Islamic Republic of Iran was born. The revolution was a watershed moment, not just in Iranian history, but in the history of the Middle East and the broader Islamic world. For the first time in modern history, an Islamic theocracy had replaced a secular monarchy through a grassroots mass movement. Ayatollah Khomeini became the supreme leader, fusing religious authority with political power in a new system of governance, Velayat-e-Faqih, or guardianship of the jurist. This transformation shocked the world. It redefined Iran's identity not as a continuation of the westernizing nation-state built by the Pahlavis, but as a sovereign, anti-imperialist Islamic republic rooted in Shia ideology. And yet, even within this new structure, Persian traditions endured. The Persian language remained the medium of intellectual and literary life. Classical poetry by Hafez, Rumi, and Sa'adi continued to be revered, and the spirit of introspection, dignity, and resistance, so deeply woven into Persian history, manifested in the political culture of the new republic. The post-revolutionary period was fraught with challenges. In 1980, Iran was plunged into a brutal 8-year war with Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, who sought to exploit Iran's post-revolutionary chaos. The conflict, one of the deadliest of the late 20th century, devastated cities, consumed resources, and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Yet it also solidified the Islamic Republic's legitimacy in the eyes of many Iranians, as the country rallied around a collective sense of survival and resistance. Meanwhile, internally, the Islamic government oscillated between periods of strict conservatism and relative openness. Reformist movements emerged, especially in the late 1990s and early 2000s, advocating for greater political freedoms, women's rights, and civil society. The tension between tradition and modernity, between religious orthodoxy and cultural plurality, continue to shape Iran's evolving identity. In many ways, modern Iran is the product of its layered past. The legacy of Cyrus and Darius, the mysticism of Rumi, the architectural splendor of Isfahan, the philosophical writings of Avicenna, and the revolutionary zeal of Khomeini all coexist within its cultural consciousness. It is a country of contradictions, ancient yet young, devout yet intellectual, defiant yet introspective. The hidden history of the Persian Empire lives on, not merely in ruins and artifacts, but in language, memory, and identity. From the windswept tomb of Cyrus the Great at Pasargadae to the bustling streets of Tehran, the story of Persia continues, ever unfolding, ever enduring. To understand modern Iran fully, one must recognize that beneath the layers of politics, religion, and revolution lies a profound philosophical tradition that has animated Persian life for millennia. Iran is not merely a geographical entity or a political system. It is an idea, an evolving narrative shaped by the tension between temporal power and eternal truth. This idea, rooted in the depths of Zoroastrian dualism, nurtured through Islamic theology, and refined by mystical Sufi introspection, has given Iranian civilization a unique and enduring character. This philosophical dimension is most clearly expressed through Persian literature, a cornerstone of Iran's cultural identity. Poetry is not a luxury in Persian life. It is a necessity. It accompanies joy and sorrow, prayer and protest, weddings and funerals. The words of Hafez, for instance, are so deeply embedded in the Iranian psyche that many homes possess his divan not merely as a book of verse, but as a spiritual companion. Hafez's poetry navigates themes of divine love, human frailty, hypocrisy, and the search for truth with a subtlety that transcends eras and ideologies. In a culture where direct expression was often constrained by political or religious authority, poetry became a sanctuary for the soul and a mirror of society. Metaphor served as resistance. Allegory offered critique. Through the mystic lens of Sufism, poets like Rumi, Attar, and Sa'di explored the human condition with emotional resonance and intellectual sophistication. Their verses served not only as artistic masterpieces, but as philosophical roadmaps, meditations on the self, the divine, and the meaning of life. It is through their words that we see how the Persian spirit adapted, endured, and ultimately transcended every empire and upheaval. Beyond poetry, Persian philosophy itself blossomed during the Islamic Golden Age, forming a synthesis of Greek rationalism, Indian metaphysics, and Islamic theology. Thinkers like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Suhrawardi carried forward a uniquely Persian school of thought that emphasized the light of reason and the harmony of existence. Avicenna's writings, especially in metaphysics and medicine, remained authoritative texts across the Islamic world and even in medieval Europe for centuries. Suhrawardi, on the other hand, developed the philosophy of illumination, a deeply spiritual framework that combined Plato's forms with Persian and Islamic mysticism. For him, all knowledge began in light, an echo of Zoroastrian fire worship and an affirmation of the soul's journey toward divine truth. These traditions weren't confined to the ivory towers of scholars. They filtered into everyday life, into the calligraphy that adorned mosques, the geometric patterns that structured Persian architecture, and even the etiquette and storytelling passed from parent to child. In a society where the external world was often unstable, the internal world, shaped by thought, belief, and imagination, offered refuge and renewal. Even Persian architecture reveals this inner harmony. From the ziggurats of Elam to the columns of Persepolis, from the domes of Isfahan to the tilework of Shiraz, Persian builders have always sought to reflect the cosmic order in earthly forms. Architecture in Iran is never merely functional. It is spiritual geometry, a dialogue between light and shadow, color and silence. The Iwan, a vaulted hall open on one side, is more than an entrance. It is a threshold between the temporal and the eternal. The mosque dome, painted with stars and calligraphic verses, is a metaphor for the heavens, a celestial mirror suspended above the faithful. This integration of art, philosophy, and spirituality helps explain Iran's extraordinary cultural resilience. While dynasties rose and fell, while borders shifted and empires collapsed, this inner world remained remarkably intact. Even during moments of great political transformation, be it the Arab conquest, the Mongol invasions, or the 1979 revolution, Iran's cultural DNA adapted rather than disappeared. Like the underground channels of water known as qanats, Persian identity flowed silently beneath the surface, nourishing the society from within. And this is perhaps the greatest mystery of Persian history. How a civilization that endured so many conquests and disruptions managed to preserve its soul. Part of the answer lies in its language. Persian, with its fluid syntax, poetic cadence, and deep historical continuity, has served as the repository of collective memory. It has absorbed foreign terms and influences, but its structure and spirit remain distinctly Iranian. Unlike many ancient languages that have vanished or become static relics, Persian is a living tongue, spoken by millions, taught in schools, and still evolving through literature, cinema, and digital expression. In the modern age, this cultural vitality continues. Iranian filmmakers have garnered international acclaim for their introspective humanistic storytelling. Artists draw upon ancient motifs with contemporary sensibilities. Musicians blend classical Persian instruments with modern rhythms. Diaspora writers and scholars bring Persian perspectives into global conversations, bridging East and West in new ways. And yet, the core questions that have animated Persian thought for thousands of years remain. What is justice? What is beauty? What is the path to truth? These are not merely academic inquiries. They are woven into the everyday fabric of Iranian life. Whether in the verses recited at a gathering, the design of a garden, or the cadence of a political speech, one hears the echo of ancient wisdom, complex, lyrical, and searching. Iran is often seen through the lens of its conflicts and controversies, but behind these headlines lies a deeper, more enduring reality. It is the story of a people who, through war and peace, faith and doubt, exile and return, have never stopped asking big questions, never ceased telling their stories, and never lost sight of the beauty in the world. The deeper one travels through the corridors of Persian history, the more one comes to understand that Persia has never been solely about kings and conquests, palaces, or wars. Instead, it is an intellectual and spiritual project, a civilization that has always sought to reconcile the material with the metaphysical, the seen with the unseen. It is no surprise, then, that Persia has exerted a powerful gravitational pull not only across Asia and the Islamic world, but also into the Western imagination. From the ancient Greeks to Enlightenment philosophers, from European poets to modern scholars, Persia has been a source of fascination, inspiration, and even longing. In antiquity, Persia loomed large in the minds of Greek historians and philosophers. Herodotus wrote extensively about the Persians, not always sympathetically, but with a kind of reverent awe for their grandeur, order, and customs. To the Greeks, the Persian Empire under Cyrus and Darius represented a mirror of themselves, disciplined, cultured, yet also an enigmatic and formidable other. Despite their military rivalry, Greek thinkers admired Persian tolerance, administrative genius, and reverence for law and tradition. Plato himself was said to have been influenced by Persian concepts of kingship and education. Centuries later, during the European Enlightenment, Persia once again captured the imagination of Western thinkers, who saw in it a model of wise rule, justice, and spiritual insight. Philosophers like Voltaire and Goethe were captivated by Persian literature, especially the works of Sa'di, Hafez, and Rumi. Goethe's West Eastern Divan was inspired by Persian poetry and aimed to build a bridge between Islamic and Western thought. He saw in Hafez a kindred spirit, playful yet profound, worldly yet divine. Persian poetry, for many Europeans, became a window into an alternative modernity, one rooted in introspection, balance, and beauty, rather than conquest or industrial domination. Even today, in a world often fractured by ideology and misunderstanding, Persian culture continues to offer a space of dialogue and reflection. In an age of noise, Persian thought invites silence. In an era of certainty, it embraces ambiguity. The mystical tradition of Sufism, born partly in Persian lands, speaks to people across faiths and borders with its emphasis on love, humility, and the inner journey. Rumi is now one of the most read poets in the Western world, not because his words are easy, but because they are necessary. But the influence of Persia is not confined to the realm of ideas. Its aesthetic sensibilities in architecture, art, design have also shaped global tastes. Persian rugs, renowned for their intricate patterns and craftsmanship, have adorned homes from Paris to Beijing. The layout of the Persian Shaharbagh garden, with its quadrants of symmetry and flowing water, influenced the design of the Mughal gardens in India, the Alhambra in Spain, and even Versailles in France. These are not merely stylistic choices. They reflect a worldview in which harmony with nature, spiritual reflection, and aesthetic order are central to human flourishing. Moreover, Persian scientific contributions, especially during the Islamic Golden Age, played a critical role in shaping modern disciplines. Persian polymaths translated and preserved Greek texts, advanced algebra, mapped the stars, and developed medical treatises that were studied in European universities for centuries. The very word algorithm derives from Al-Khwarizmi, a Persian mathematician whose work underpins today's digital world. Medicine, astronomy, optics, all were enriched by Persian minds working in a spirit of inquiry and synthesis. At the heart of these achievements lies a deep philosophy of continuity. While many civilizations have defined themselves through rupture, revolutions, renaissances, and breaks with the past, Persia has always moved in cycles, folding the new into the old, transforming while remembering. This is why Persian culture can absorb shocks and yet remain itself. Whether under Arab caliphates, Mongol Khans, or modern autocrats, the core ethos endures: reverence for knowledge, a poetic vision of life, and the search for the eternal through the temporal. In modern times, this resilience has often taken the form of cultural memory. The image of Cyrus the Great, once a half-forgotten figure carved into the stone of Pasargadae, has been resurrected as a symbol of tolerance and human rights. His Cyrus cylinder, considered by some as the first charter of human rights, is cited in both Iranian nationalist and global humanist discourses. For many Iranians today, Cyrus embodies an ideal of leadership that transcends sectarianism, a reminder that Persia's greatness has always been rooted in inclusion and justice. And this memory is not passive, it is active, invoked in protests, literature, cinema, and music. When modern Iranians chant verses of Hafez or walk silently through the ruins of Persepolis, they are not indulging in nostalgia. They are participating in a living tradition, reaffirming a lineage that connects them to both their ancestors and their aspirations. The Persian Empire, then, is not merely a historical subject. It is a spiritual and cultural compass, guiding millions in Iran and across the diaspora. It reminds us that civilization is not a matter of territory or power, but of thought, beauty, and the capacity to dream. And this dream, once born in the deserts of Elam and the halls of Persepolis, continues to shimmer like the stars that once guided Persian astrologers and the verses that still stir Persian hearts. As we come to the end of this long and winding journey through the hidden history of the Persian Empire, we are left not with a single story, but with a constellation of voices, ideas, and legacies. Persia has never been just a place. It is a rhythm in the language, a curve in the architecture, a metaphor in the poetry. It is a civilization that has breathed through millennia, sometimes quietly, sometimes defiantly, always gracefully. The names we have passed: Cyrus, Darius, Ferdowsi, Rumi, Hafez, Avicenna, are more than historical figures. They are echoes of the same soul, each one a different note in a symphony that has never ceased playing. Through conquest and collapse, reform and revolution, the Persian story has flowed on, like the rivers of Shiraz or the hidden Khanats beneath the desert. Modern Iran continues to carry this legacy. In every verse spoken, in every tile placed by hand, in every call to reflection, the ancient Persian ideals of justice, beauty, and wisdom still shine. And as long as the Persian language is spoken, as long as a child opens the Shahnameh, or a family gathers around Hafez on the new year, this empire, this idea, will never be truly hidden. It lives in memory, in art, in spirit, and now perhaps it lives a little in you too.